We're in the 9th chapter of Bava Metzia. We're leasing a field. And this is typically going to be leased on what we might call a sharecropping agreement. In other words, a share of profits. It doesn't have to be. Could be rented on a fixed rent. We'll see as the Mishnah goes on that both situations the Mishnah seems to deal with both situations. And as we go through this chapter, this 9th chapter, we're going to morph. We're going to segue from leasing a field with a share, with a profit agreement, to employment rights. So we're going to get into employment, but for the moment we're in leasing. And we learned in the first couple of Mishnayot that two typical issues of contention arose. The first was the obligation of the tenant to take proper care of the field. They have shared responsibility for care of the field. And the second was the question as to what happens if there's some disaster and the field doesn't yield. And of course, both of those questions are intrinsic to profit share. And we'll see as the chapter develops that the chapter deals with both these issues, the responsibility of the tenant and who is responsible if there's some natural disaster. The chapter deals with each of these issues in turn. But to begin with, as we pick up the third Mishnah, we're going to start with the responsibility of the tenant. And in fact, there are 3 Mishnayot dealing with these responsibilities, and we'll just cover them in sequence in a few minutes. Someone who someone who leased a field and he let it go fallow, he let it go, he didn't tend it. In other words, it doesn't produce any wheat or any barley. So, of course, if he has to pay a fixed rent, there's no issue. But if he's paying a proportion of the yield on the field as rent to the landlord, then that's of course material to the landlord, because essentially by letting it lie fallow, he's depriving the landlord of rent. So the Mishnah is going to explain, someone who leased a field and let it lie fallow, we assess how much it would have yielded, how much it normally yields. And he actually gives it to him, i.e. the tenant gives the landlord. Because he says, and the assumption in the Gemara is that this is a standard term in a rental agreement. So not that he said this explicitly, but it's understood in a rental agreement. Im ovir velo avir ashalem b'meitava. If I let it fallow, if I let it go fallow and I don't till it, I will pay at the best. I.e., I will give you the best possible produce, i.e., I will give you a proportion of whatever is due at the rate that the field should have yielded. So if we rent on a profit share basis, we can't wantonly just stop tending the field. And similarly, someone who leased a field from his fellow, but didn't want to weed it. Maybe he doesn't want to weed it. Maybe he doesn't have the time to weed it. But he's essentially degrading the value of this field by not weeding it. Someone leased a field and he didn't want to weed it. And he said to him, Amarlo, he said, what do you care? You say that in modern Hebrew too. What do you care about it? Look, I pay you the rent. What do you care if I weed it? Ein shominlo. We don't listen to him. Shehu omerlo. Because he could say to him, that is to say, the owner could say to him, and again, we're going back to custom and practice in rental of land. Tomorrow you're going to leave the field. And it's just going to grow weeds for me. If we don't weed it by hand carefully and continuously, the value of this field is dropping because the weeds become established. This is the era before herbicides. The weeds will become established if you don't keep them under control. Even if you plow it up, their seeds will become established, and you're degrading its value. As a tenant, you have to hand back the field in equivalent condition, and that means you have to keep it weeded. What about the profit share? What about the profit share? What if it doesn't yield? Someone leased a field and it didn't produce. It didn't produce. If there was enough produce to make a heap, he must still tend to it. So there's conflict of interest here. He's leased this field. It's not profitable. It's not worth his while to tend it. He would rather just leave it fallow. He would just rather leave it fallow. But as we explained a couple of Mishnayot before, if he leaves it fallow, he's depriving the landlord of the profit share. So how are we going to define, well, how much not fruitfulness do we allow before we let this tenant just stop tending the field? So the Mishnah ruled, Im yesh ba kedei hamid ba kri. If there was enough produce to make a heap, hayav litapel bo. He still has to take care of it. Of course, we don't really understand what a heap is. And I brought the Bartanura on the source sheet. The Bartanura expresses very beautifully, Vehu karov lisatai. If it's close to two seahs. Now, a seah is about a gallon. It's just under a gallon. So 2 seahs is about 2 gallons. If this field produces 2 gallons of seed, he has to engage with it. He has to take care of it against his will. There's no getting out of the contract. Now we'll see that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't like this idea. And the halakha, by the way, doesn't go according to Rabbi Yehuda, but our logic is very sympathetic to him, and it's worth, let's just think carefully about what he's saying. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ma hitzva kri. What sort of measure is a heap? That's not a measure. That's not a legal measure. And in any case, isn't it going to depend on the size of the field? So for a tiny little garden to produce 2 gallons of seed will be amazing. If it's a 50-acre field, then 2 gallons of wheat might not be very much. And so we can think, Rabbi Yehuda we can think that Rabbi Yehuda is thinking, hang on, rather than defining a heap, shouldn't we define some kind of measure which is related to the size of the field? And this is what he proposes. Eila, im yesh ba kedei nefila. If there's enough for falling, for dropping. What Rabbi Yehuda seems to be getting at is, how much seed would you put in the field? If you get back the seed that you put in other words, and there's clearly a profit and loss issue here, because if you get back more than the seed you put in, you're making some profit, however minimal, on this field. If there's enough for seeding, if you get back enough for seeding, at that point, you're committed as a tenant to work the field. If you don't get back what you seeded, you should have the right to walk away from the contract. And that's the view of Rabbi Yehuda. But the Gemara and the Halakha, in fact, doesn't follow Rabbi Yudah, even though I think we might have a lot of sympathy with him today.